Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's just gone 2 o'clock, so time to resume the hearing sessions as part of the examination of the Dover District Local Plan. Welcome along for those people who didn't attend this morning's session. I know, Mr. Barrett, you weren't there. Welcome back, Ms. Wakely, even though that you did attend this morning. Given that I think we've only got 2 participants, Mr. Barrett, I think it's fair to say that you're quite experienced in local planning examinations and teams and everything that we had to go through during the course of the pandemic. I will just very quickly say no agenda for today, so we'll go through the matters, issues and questions as we have done on other sessions. I'll keep my camera on at all times, and if I can ask that the council do the same thing as well, just so it's not flicking on and off. And then in terms of participants, given there's only 2 of you, if the conversation is going backwards and forwards, then there's only 2 of you. I'm quite happy for you to sort of just mute your microphone and leave your cameras on rather than sort of going on and off. Any matters arising from the council before we start? So I won't go through the. Okay, thanks. I won't go through the usual sort of introductions. I know that we've all sort of attended some of the previous hearing sessions, but yeah, just usual sort of house rules around using the raise hand function when you wish to speak, and that goes for everybody. So unless there's anything arising, we will crack straight on then. Just one quick thing from me. Mr. Coyne can't make this afternoon, so my colleague Mr. Coyne's not here. He obviously has been at all the other sessions, but he can't make this afternoon's session. So it's just obviously myself and Louise, the programme officer. Today, right. Climate change policy. So we've got into some of obviously the meat of the local plan and the DM policies. And the first question was around policy CC1. And there's a question there that we asked around what's the justification for this policy. And it's probably worthwhile going straight to the council's hearing statement. So I think there's some suggested changes. So I don't know whether the council just wants to start off on this topic just by explaining what policy CC1 does, or what it's trying to do, and what changes you think, if any, are necessary for soundness, please.
Thank you very much. As per the title, this policy is about reducing carbon emissions, which we all know is a critical aspect of planning at the moment. The government timeline towards building regulations, and they're really quite ambitious. Carbon targets have been working alongside the council and have gone ahead of us, which means that the policy has changed a lot through its lifetime. We do think a policy is necessary, despite the government proposals being significant and meaningful. So we've set out a number of changes. I'm going to take you through them. So we would like to request applicants to submit energy statements with their planning application, and that will set out how their application responds to the government's 2025 emissions requirements. So we do believe that there's plenty in there relevant to planning, which we should be considering early on in the planning process, such as the orientation of buildings, the size, position and shading of windows, on-site renewables, and the materials used in the building. So it would be ideal if applications did consider all these aspects prior to the development moving on to building regs. So the changes, as well as requiring an energy statement, we've defined a little bit more detail the type of information that we would like to see. So the first being a fabric-first approach to energy efficiency. There's a couple of examples there. And secondly, the use of materials and building techniques to reduce heat energy needs. We've also put in the modification a reference to lower embodied carbon content, but on review, that's probably best left in the sustainable construction policy. So there was meant to be a government consultation this year on embodied energy, which would probably go into building regs, but they haven't. It hasn't happened. So there's perhaps some uncertainty about that. So we'll leave that, if it's okay with you, in the CC2 policy. The BREEAM references stay mainly the same. And then at the end of the policy, we make some more just tidying up of policy wording to make sure the efficiency is designed in to the proposal.
So in the council suggested change, policy CC1 would start with residential development proposals must include an energy statement which should describe how reductions in carbon emissions that are required through the relevant building regulations in place at the time will be achieved. Why do you think that's necessary for a local plan policy when it's relating to something that's outside of the planning system, i.e. it's building regulations, that's got its own set of, well, regulations and requirements. Why then should a local plan require a developer to demonstrate how that will be met? And secondly, could a developer or site promoter actually demonstrate that if, for example, you know, it was an outline with all matters reserved, for example, what would they do? So there's got two questions there, really. Should it just be left to the building regulations? And how would a developer or site promoter actually achieve the requirements of this policy? Again, when they're maybe not the builder, they're looking to get planning permission and sort of sell the land on.
Okay. Just going back to sort of some of my original points, a lot of the aspects of the design and layout of development is going to be determined at the planning application stage, and that's all critical to the carbon efficiencies. So the orientation of the buildings is important for Part O of the building regs. Size, position and shading of windows. So looking at solar gain and shading. That's that you know, the development management officers need to know where the layout and design of the building externally is. And also on-site renewables, you know, are often considered at the planning application stage. And then your final question, I think I've answered my own question. It would be at the detailed stage that they would have to demonstrate that, because it's all about the detail. And we want the detailed layout and design of the development to take account of the building regulations, and presumably that's going to be helpful for the builder or developer as well, to ensure that they're making those calculations and assessments as they move along the development design process. Further to some of your previous comments, we could change it to say have regard to building regulation, just to show how they've had regard to the building regulations and how it's affected. So it's the design point, which is essential.
We'll open it up to discussion. I think the sort of main thrust of the policy is fine in seeking to you know, minimize energy consumption, make buildings more efficient, you know, reference to solar gain, having a, you know, consideration of position, layout, sorry, all these things are fine, and they are part of good design anyway, and certainly around maximizing efficiency. it's the reference to the building regulations that I'm struggling with. But we'll open it up and see what other people think. Mr. Barrett, we'll go to you first, please.
Thank you, sir. Well, I was going to raise the points that you've raised, sir, with regard to the building regulations and why would you need to show, given that if you have to meet building regulations, you have to meet building regulations. So therefore, it's a different process and a different regime. There is no need to show that at a planning stage, and I think you've raised a couple of very good points. I think in terms of the other aspect is, it's also quite a repetition of CC2 in terms of what is seeking to be achieved. I think it's seeking to achieve in terms of an improvement in the energy efficiency, but it is about solar gains through positioning, solar shading, which are also referenced really within CC2 in terms of the design of a development coming forward, and whether actually there is a necessity to repeat it with regard to in CC1. It feels almost like a slightly redundant policy with regard to what's being required. I think in terms of statements, I think there is, in terms of show how they've considered measures to potentially reduce energy efficiency related to solar gain, but that really again down to sustainable construction and design, which is referenced in CC2. So it's whether actually the CC1 is necessary, or whether actually it really rolls into that CC2 policy in terms of actually what are those measures that are being undertaken within terms of the design of the development, in terms of its location, layout, and everything else is being used to try and, as far as possible, minimise or reduce the level of energy use. Sir. Thank you.
Ms. Wakeleaf, any comments on this?
Thank you. My understanding is that the hearing statement from DDC Planning is a slight tightening up of what was in the Reg 19 local plan that we were consulted on, in the light of building regs which have come out since December 2022, so that the 2013 building regulations have been superseded. Is that correct, before I go on?
The difficulty with this policy is that at the regulation 18 stage, the draft stage, we were considering options for what's carbon emissions reductions in new buildings, and the council's preferred approach at that stage was a 31% reduction in carbon emissions. That has then been brought into building regulations as a standard requirement, as the baseline requirement, effectively. So the policy has had to evolve effectively as other things that are outside of our control have moved on. So the council sort of sought to keep the policy in order to ensure that it's promoting reduction in carbon emissions, but obviously it does acknowledge that those are now, in the council's preferred position at that stage, they are now effectively subsumed within building regulations. Does that answer your question, Sarah?
Yes, and therefore I will carry on. Thank you. On the 31st of October, I had a chance to speak to Lord Deben, the outgoing chair of UK Climate Change Committee, and on exactly this issue that we're discussing today. He was at an event in Canterbury, and I asked about the pressure that we have here in Kent, 13 local planning authorities, local plans, and an extreme pressure to build in the southeast because it's regarded as a highly profitable county, while at the same time we are going to be on the sharp end as coastal areas of rising sea level, etc., etc., etc. And I will point at his views that he gave to me orally then are also published in 2020 in Construction News. So it is worth mentioning them because they underline why we should weaken nothing at all and try to strengthen as much as we can. Lord Deben, known as John Gummer before joining the House of Lords, labelled the scrapping of plans to ensure all new homes were built to zero carbon standards in 2015 as stupid, his word, and called it a scandal, his word, that 1 million homes have been built since then without such high environmental standards. Lord Deben called for an end to building homes that would need retrofitting in the future. He said, we, quote, we have got to have a much higher standard, and we've got to have high standards immediately, and we've got to enforce them. He added that standards should apply to homes as well as to other buildings like warehouses and offices. Quote, developments of all kinds have got to be built with well-insulated, well-ventilated systems which do not, sorry, jump. Which do not use fossil fuels. And the enforcement could include, according to Lord Deben, actually pulling down buildings that should not be in line with what we need. And of course, we have already referred to the fact that we're online for an overshoot of 150 and up to 2.4 or 3. So this is why we have said in our submission on the local plan would become compliant with legality, Net Zero Carbon, Climate Emergency Declaration and Climate Change Act 2008. If the steps we recommended were to be made requirements for all applicants, and particularly the transformation of existing homes into future-proof zero carbon homes to lift residents out of fuel poverty and mitigate climate crisis. I would suggest that we should be as robust as possible on all of the issues, the solar gains, the solar shading, the EPC-A or zero carbon homes should be borne in mind that this is what is going to cause us to be able to cope with the 21st century challenge. Viability or no viability, profitability or no profitability.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just take the council's comments then, just in terms of especially the first point around where policy CC1 ends up sort of sitting. So you've got CC2, which is about sustainable design and construction. That's obviously some of the points Mr. Wakelee has made. So what does policy CC1 try and do? And is it potentially redundant, or do you think there's still things within policy CC1 that need to be in the plan that aren't covered elsewhere?
I think the criteria could be included in CC2 if they're not already. But I mean, part of the reason is setting carbon emissions aside as a focus within the local plan is quite important. It's got a sort of different thrust than the CC2 policy. So that which requires developments to look at a range of things, and the applicant could put together a description of how they're meeting those criteria. But CC1 is a focused policy to describe how they're going to meet the building regulations. They're due to be coming to play in 2025, but there hasn't been any recent updates. I think it's really important to say as well from the government.
I think we would probably be happy to look at whether they were better submerged as sort of one policy. There is quite a lot of crossover, I think, but we would probably look at whether or not then to be a specific criteria about carbon emissions, drawing on some of the things that are in CC1. So we could have a look at them together, whether we keep it CC1 separate or CC2, but just making sure that there's no that it's clear there's either distinction between them or where there's crossover, where that's clear.
Yeah, I mean, some local plans go or have done and we've certainly examined some recently that have gone above building regulations, and there's obviously there's quite a high profile case going through at the minute with regard to that. That's not what this plan seeks to do, and I think in that context, let's say policy CC1 as a policy is not unsound, and it is seeking to reduce carbon emissions. That's consistent with wide sustainability objectives of national planning policy. I think it's the reference to the building regulations where the policy falls down, because that is very much a separate process and it sits outside of the planning system. And I'm not sure that a planning policy should be requiring somebody to demonstrate compliance with the building regulations, because you just simply wouldn't know. You might get the site promoter with an outline, all matters reserved. The planning permission wouldn't apply. Also, there are things within building regulations that presumably you wouldn't at planning stage have to determine, so you wouldn't be getting involved, presumably, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think DM colleagues would be getting involved with window U values and thicknesses and all those things that that form part of the building regulations. That's why they have the separate, planning is about land use and exactly like you said, the position orientation of buildings. All those things, fine, have them in the policy. Anything to do with building regulations then, which may or may not change in 2025, I don't think that's necessary. And certainly the suggested change wouldn't be justified or effective for the reasons I've set out. I don't think you can be expecting people to demonstrate how they can meet building regulations at a plan application stage. It's just not relevant. Thoughts on that? Does that make sense? I mean, whether or not you want to, I'm happy for you to keep CC1. I'll leave it in your hands whether you want to merge the two. I think you're right. I think CC1 probably is different to CC2. I'll leave it in your hands. If you want to sort of merge the two or keep them separate, fine.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think we're happy. What we need to do is to pull out it's the relevant planning parts that are needed in order to achieve that 31% reduction in carbon emissions, and we need to pull them out and put them into the policy, into the criteria. I think that's what we're really trying to do here.
Ms. Wakelee, I'll go to you first and then go to Mr. Barrett.
Thank you kindly. I'm obliged to the officer for pointing out that this building regs that is underpinning the hearing statement isn't going to come into activity until 2025. And that being the case, I would suggest that we can't therefore rely on it. There's a lot going to come forward. The pressure is on now, and therefore I would suggest that CC1 needs to have to be as strong and robust on issues of reducing the energy load of the development, maximising the energy efficiency of the fabric of building, delivering on-site low carbon and renewable energy systems and carbon reductions as much as possible. That needs to be robust. That's what we would suggest ought to be a main modification, because the reliance can't be on something that's not going to be enforceable until 2025. I also have to just refer to precedent. And of course, one is aware of the precedent of the Reading local plan, Reading Borough Council local plan for 2019, which had zero carbon homes within it. One is also aware of the precedent of the Plymouth and South Devon joint local plan adopted in 2019. The three LPAs involved in that being West Devon, South Hams and Plymouth City Council. So the precedent is there for local planning authorities to be robust, and I would suggest that that is the path that needs to be travelled in the interests of residents now and residents in the future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Berrett.
Thanks, it was really just to say, in terms of if the council are going to retain that difference, it is about ensuring that there is a difference between CC1 and CC2 in terms of those. So there is a clear ability to determine applications on the basis of those, and it's not just a repeat of what's been done, what's said in one from the other. I think in one way that might be able to do that is, rather than so I suppose to demonstrate that fabric first efficiency, is looking at some should show how they've considered measures to minimise energy consumption, and then go into those measures that are potentially there. So I think there is a way of wording them differently, but it's ensuring that there is that difference between the two policies, as the council have said. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and I don't think we'd have, let's say, I think what it needs to change, we certainly wouldn't have any objection to the like say, it's the, what are you trying to seek from a sort of land use planning design approach at the plan application stage. Yeah, because obviously you refer to fabric first, but then there's also the issue of on-site renewable and low carbon technologies. So just being clear, you know, what actually you're requiring applicants to do. It goes back to that point, I've said it a few times, isn't it? Just making the policy abundantly clear what you are requiring an applicant for planning permission to demonstrate to you. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that does. Yes, yeah.
Okay. What we'll do, we'll move on to policy CC2 because we sort of strayed into it. And I think really within the MIQs, question 1 was about CC1 and then question 2 is about the building regs, but we may as well look at CC2. So in terms of policy CC2 then, is there anything in there that you think needs to change? The one thing that jumps out for me, and I've probably said it on a few sessions, is the final requirement: all applications for new buildings should be accompanied by a sustainable design and construction statement. So it's, again, it's just going back to that, you know, you're going to end up with a lot of statements for different things. You know, see, energy statements, you've already got design and access statements, you've then got design, sustainable design, construction statements. So I think that's probably part of the policy that you need to have a look at and just make sure there isn't this sort of repetition of just statements being provided. I think I said it on day 1. You know, the plan needs to be really clear about what development should do, rather than sort of preparation of statements for things. Any other changes then that you think are necessary to CC2? I know that you're probably going to go away and have a look at it in the context of what we just talked about, but was there anything in there that you think needs to change?
No, I don't think there was anything else. No. No.
And Mr. Barrett or Ms. Wigley, anything within CC2 that you think it does or doesn't need to do?
Not from my perspective, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fairly straightforward. Have a look at it in the context of whether you need both policies and also just that bit about the statements. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a statement for every single policy. Ms. Wakeleaf.
Oops, thank you. In our submission, we asked that a revised sustainable design and construction SPD be produced in 2023 to contain more detail on achieving the requirement of minimal impact on carbon emissions, but where homes are not designed to be carbon neutral, this will mean a minimum of 40% improvement in the dwelling emission rate over the, at the time, 2013 building regs, and a contribution of 1,800 per tonne towards carbon offsetting within the Dover District Council. That's what we asked for in our submission.
Okay, I think it's probably the point that we've discussed already.
Yeah, just to say that the government's proposals do go higher than the 40% improvement and 50% in 2028.
Thank you, Gillian.
Yes, they go higher than that quite significantly.
Thank you.
In terms of the SPD, we will be producing a design code, which will pick up sustainable construction points in a bit more detail.
Just on the bit about statements as well, as to where it crops up, you could probably subtly change it by, rather than just the sort of requirement of a statement, is just having the policy say, you know, development proposals must demonstrate how they meet all of the following criteria, or something like that. You know, it's you are still requiring demonstration of how you meet the policy. It just removes this this sort of requirement for statements. The only reason I raise it is we see it quite a lot, especially at appeal casework, where not just on energy efficiency, but on all these points where people, you know, there becomes an argument about, well, we submitted a statement, and then there's an argument, often sort of drags into an appeal about, well, we submitted a statement, and the council say, well, it didn't cover what we wanted it to do. And you end up having a debate about what a statement does or doesn't contain, and you miss the point that no, the point is the development should do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, not just a statement about it. So, but it's just the tweaking of the wording rather than anything else. Okay, we'll move on. Question 3 again is part of this wider topic about what the plan should or shouldn't do, which I've already covered, really. We'll go through the policies. CC3 then. So what does CC3 do that's different to what we've talked about already?
CC3 is a policy that supports development for renewable low carbon energy. So that's for sort of standalone proposals for sort of solar panels or other, you know, other types of renewable energy projects that require planning consent. So it's a sort of supportive, permissive policy to encourage the provision of that type of development, and sets out criteria that the council will consider when looking at those applications. The council do receive quite a lot of applications for example, solar panels on agricultural land, etc. So to cover off those requirements and to meet the requirements of NPPF at paragraph 155.
And again, any changes that were in your schedule that apply to this one?
No changes. Although the I don't know if the Dover Harbour Board in their representation did suggest a change to this policy, which would I think it would probably strengthen the policy in relation to paragraph 155C of the NPPF in terms of support for drawing energy supply from decentralised renewable low carbon energy systems. I think probably leave it up to you as to whether or not you think it's actually necessary for soundness, but the council will be quite good in terms of I think it's the first paragraph that the Dover Harbour Board is in their representation. It's representation number 707. Well, it was a reasonable suggestion from them in terms of the first paragraph they've suggested.
Yeah, I think so, because you could, yeah, I think you could probably go either way with it. You probably said it's already covered by national planning policy, but I think equally, if the council wanted to make that change, then it's probably something we could support by, you know, it's ensuring consistency with national planning policy. So I'll sort of leave that in your hands, really, if it's something that you wanted to see, and it would just be to reflect the NPPF. Then I don't think there'd be any objection from ourselves. Ms. Wakeleaf.
Thank you kindly. I'm looking at CC3 and I'm particularly looking at E. Now, while I'm very aware that the NPPF says best and most versatile agricultural land, I flagged this up before, given that Dover District has got a 70% agriculture rural economy, and we are a net exporter of good, healthy, grown food, the local plan could tweak that and have not such a tight description of the agricultural land one wants to protect. They could have something like, you know, good and versatile agricultural land. That's something I would suggest is a modification to be considered. I would also just flag up that while on one hand that would therefore reduce how much land might be available for renewable and low carbon energy development, one could also be incentivizing solar barns, so farmland, so that if you've got extra rainfall and you've got your crops which are getting ruined, then your solar barns are a place to have high level solar which isn't impeding what you're doing. I'm also mindful that Port of Dover has got some very ambitious plans to decarbonise and is interested in hydro generation. So I'm welcoming what's been said about Port of Dover wanting decentralised energy generation there. That all seems positive, if I may offer that. The other thing I just want to say is obviously wind turbines don't have to be enormous. They can be the columnar ones, which are less impactful, and that could be incentivized too somehow.
Okay, any comments just on the agricultural land point, or was this just reflecting national planning policy?
Yeah, the criteria at the moment just reflects national planning policy in terms of its definition of best and most versatile. Yeah, so I think it's best to stick with the terminology used.
Okay, we'll move on. We'll go through all of these actually. It's useful to go through them. CC4 then. This is about water efficiency and achieving maximum use 110 litres per person per day. And also we asked questions about this, and this comes from, well, it's set out in the council statement. I won't go through it, but this is a fairly sort of standard policy. You know, you've referred to sort of areas of water stress, etc., etc. Any comments from anybody on this particular policy then? Council said that you obviously included in the viability assessment as well. Any comments, Ms. Wakeleave, on this one?
Yes, please. Thank you. Yes, please. It's been discussed in East Kent, not only within the Dover district, that yes, obviously we are water stressed, and there is a unwillingness of Southern Water to admit they're depleting water in the chalk aquifers, and their unwillingness to invest in new water collection infrastructure. Therefore, given the low cost of initial installation of rainwater harvesting and high cost of this afterwards, I know that rainwater harvesting is within the local plan, that you have catered for this, but it could be strengthened to say permission will be granted only if designs include the installation of rainwater harvesting and grey water recycling.
Okay, any comments on that?
The council are bound here really by the technical standards in relation to water efficiency, and you will have seen in the representations that a number of the bodies Environment Agency agree with Miss Wakeleave in terms of requiring higher standards, but The council has gone as far as it's allowed, as far as it understands, in terms of the building technical standards the government set out in the PDG. The policy does strongly support proposals that further reduce water consumption in paragraph 2, and that's about as far as we understand we're able to go in accordance with national policy and requirements.
Any other comments on this, Mr. Barrett? Anything from yourself? No. Yeah, it's out in the PPG, isn't it? I think actually CC2 probably covers this as well a little bit, does it? Is there anything else within just the generic sustainable construction?
Yeah, we do refer in criteria D of CC2 as well to measures including, for example, rainwater harvesting, drought resistant landscaping. So there are some other sort of measures that can be looked at through that policy as well.
Yeah, I think so, especially for the larger developments. I think it's probably enough within CC2 as well, isn't there, to require a bit more thought to that, really. But CC4 is probably just standalone, isn't it, in terms of the actual efficiency measures of new dwellings. Again, question 4 within in the MIQs is a sort of one about the viability, and yes, in essence, these have been subject to viability testing. Is that right? I know there was a point about CC1 and what had and hadn't been tested, but just in terms of all the other requirements, they've been included in the viability assessment.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, so yeah, CC1 has been included as I said earlier, the preferred option at the regulation 18 stage is effectively the same as now as in building regulations. So that was the option that was tested in terms of costs at that point when the viability assessment was done. And then it's been addressed again in the update note, July 2022, which confirms that those form part of the base viability assessments. Yeah. And in terms of CC2 and CC8, they are sort of normal development costs, really. We didn't think there's any additional costs as a result of those. And yeah, CC4 is included as it's only a de minimis cost anyway, for £9 a dwelling.
Yeah, Mr. Barrett.
Thanks, sir. I think the only point really with regard to the viability study and the testing is that the future home standard requirements that was mentioned, but obviously now deleted it, but from the plan haven't been tested with regard to those higher standards. And obviously those standards are due to be coming in at 2025, so within, well within the plan period in terms of that, and whether consideration should have been given actually in terms of those higher standards moving forward within the local plan. I think I set out some costs in terms of what those might be within our hearing statements, and I think it's just reasonable to consider those. Obviously, the council have set out, I think, elsewhere in terms of flexibilities with regard to other policies, but it's just important to recognise that there will be higher costs in relation to those coming forward, obviously from 2025.
In terms of future home standards, in terms of future home standards, the government consulted on the proposal, and we don't know exactly what it's going to require and what it's going to look like, so it'd be very hard to do viability testing on that. And furthermore, it's it's not in the plan as yet. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think, like I said, where local authorities have gone down the route of, and myself and Mr. Coyne have found one sound, and it's adopted, where they have gone sort of above and beyond current building regulations. That's where the detailed viability assessments of those proposals and the sort of feasibility and practicalities come into it. But I think that's because that's not the case here. It's slightly different in terms of the evidence. So no, I think that's fine. To say you have set that out and tested the relevant parts. That's fine. Question 5. This asks whether you have looked at any locations that would be suitable in principle for medium or large scale wind turbines. If so, are they appropriate? And if not, why not? I think in a sort of very brief summary, is the council's position simply due to the sort of nature of the constraints within the district? Is that sort of where you've gone with this approach?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Do you want to just expand upon that a little bit more? Did you sort of start to look at any of this? Did you start to do some evidence on this? How did you sort of reach that conclusion?
It's fair to say it was quite a high level assessment really in terms of the constraints, particularly in relation to the number of internationally designated sites and what they're designated for, and also the landscape designations across the districts. So yeah, quite a high level assessment taken into account those factors. The council decided that it wasn't appropriate at this stage to identify any or to look at that further.
Any comments on that, Ms. Wakelee?
Thank you. We get easterlies as well as westerlies, and one wonders about the Tilmanston slag heap. As regards onshore wind.
So is that a specific site then, Ms. Wakelee?
Yeah, it's you've got, we discussed it when we discussed the Elvington site. There's the Pike Road comes off the it's one of our best roads in the area, the A256, that goes straight up from Whitfield to Sandwich, and then it's got a wee bit of road that comes off to the west, and there's a small industrial estate there, Pike Road. And then just inland of that, you've got the Tilmanston slag heap. Now, that might be too close to residential. You guys might know that better than me. I'll just, you guys know better than me. You're paid to do the job. I'm a mere volunteer.
So I think this would probably fall into the plan would still, obviously that's a specific site where I think we're referring to sort of the broad principles of areas. So I think that's what the council sort of saying, that they didn't do that higher level assessment of identifying large areas that were potentially suitable for wind turbines. Given the sort of national and international constraints that you've got. Anything else the council wants to add on that?
I'd just say that many of us here have the benefit of being able to pop over the water and see how this is done in France. Obviously, one of the ways that France gets around the residents' problems of having wind turbines close to residential areas is they put them alongside motorways. We have strategic roads in the area. So, is this something that could be borne in mind or not?
Does council want to come back on that point?
I think in terms of the strategic roads, the both of them have the constraint of the two main strategic roads, the A2 and A20 have the constraint of the A1B, either like adjoining them or they are within the A1B. So obviously that significant landscape designation is the reason why in that part of the district the council didn't consider it was appropriate.
Okay, no, points noted. We'll certainly take those into account. Policy CC4 we talked about, that was the water efficiency. CC5 then on flood risk. There was a suggested change here. Do you want to briefly run through that for me?
This is a change requested by the Environment Agency. So we suggested you an AM 85. And in the Statement of Common Ground, the Environment Agency requested some more changes to that additional modification. maybe go slightly further than a additional modification. So rather than referring to flood zones 2 and 3, it should just be referring to flood zone 3 in terms of the design flood level and the slab level for living and sleeping standards.
Okay, so that's within, let's just turn that up then. So that's within the policy itself, is it?
Yes, it is. It's the last paragraph.
Right, okay. So that was your original AM85, but has been
Yeah.
expanded and corrected then. So yeah, so that would be a main modification, and it's needed for effectiveness and consistency with national policy, and it's obviously correcting the position. So that's fine. AM86, I know we're moving on. Surface water management, but whilst we're here, AM86 then, just talk me through why that's necessary, because that's within the supporting text, I think, is it?
Yeah, I mean, that arguably could be an additional modification. It's just sort of some additional information requirement that was requested by representation, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, that's from the that's from the drainage board.
Yeah, from the Riversdale Drainage Board, they requested that addition for clarification.
Yeah, I think that probably does fall outside of soundness.
Yeah.
The one above definitely is a main modification,
Yeah.
because that's say clarifying policy, but I think that's probably, that would be outside of our scope to add that in. It's simply, as I say, a point of clarification, isn't it? Ms. Wakeleave?
Thank you. CC5 and flood risk. I had a phone call from Guston Parish Clerk last night, where they felt that they were in a similar situation to the one we discovered a few days ago when Chillenden came and discussed with them the flood risk in their village. So that being the case, we feel that these wetter winters, which are a feature of climate change, means that some sort of modification along the lines of undeveloped valley bottoms within 2 miles of urban settlements should be left undeveloped, both as means of allowing natural flood prevention and to prevent new and existing homes from being flooded.
So CC5 states that development on sites at risk of flooding must comply with National Planning Policy Framework and associated guidance, and will only be permitted as an exception. Wait, so is that an exception to? Is that an exception to National Planning Policy then?
We actually think that the words "an exception" probably need to come out. I think it's suggesting that only be permitted as in exceptional circumstances, and I think we discussed this earlier, didn't we, in relation to other policies that were sort of adding more than is required. I think that the council wanted to, the focus should be we shouldn't be building on land at risk of flooding, but obviously you can't go further than what the NPPF says. So yeah, that as an exception, it should come out, I think.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, and then the final part we've talked about, where you've got in your second paragraph, I think that's probably fine because that's only referring to a flood risk assessment, isn't it? That's flood risk assessment prepared in accordance with guidance of the councils. So site-specific guidance for managing, is that an SPD or an SPG or something, or is it just a standalone document?
That's just a standalone document. We could add after that where updated, or just so it stays current. That'll be a document that I imagine would update as required.
Yeah, you could do. So I think in terms of CC5, I think the first it's a sentence, I think, isn't it? The first paragraph certainly just needs tweaking. Yeah, essentially what you're saying is that the tests are set out in national planning policy. There's no need to repeat them here. Is where you're going with that. The second paragraph is fine. That's only referring to how you do the flood risk assessment, or if you want to add in, as updated or as, etc. for the council's guidance, you can do. And then the final change is the one we talked about, which just gets the flood zones correct. Yeah, okay. Ms. Wakely, did you want to say something? So I saw your hand come up and then go back down again.
Very good of you, thank you. I just put in a plea for when the flood risk assessment is being done for the environment outside assessments to be also take into consideration what local parish councils have got local knowledge. And this is one of the things I think we learned a couple of weeks ago. Local knowledge matters.
Okay, thank you. So there's no other changes on. I know we sort of went over CC5 and CC6 quite quickly then, but there's nothing else on CC6, was there, that you wanted to look at? What you might find on CC6, so what you might find is just again in accordance with the PPG.
Yeah,
so
that's what we were just going to say. Yeah, we need to remove that reference. Yeah. Yeah. I think the criteria probably already set out was in the PPG anyway. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fine.
That's everything.
The CC7 then, so this is coastal change management areas. And I think you suggested another change here, but I think it's maybe to supporting text.
This is to the policy and the supporting text. It's quite a lot of changes to words, mainly because it needs clarification compared to the assessment that was done, the coastal change work that we've completed. So it more accurately refers to the recommendations in that document, in particular, and with reference to householder applications.
Let's just go through them one by one then. So this is in the council's hearing statement. So the first change is the deletion of the words as identified on the policies map.
It's because it's already referred to in the first sentence. We were.
Yeah, that's just.
All right, okay.
Yes, it's
fine.
In there twice.
Yeah. Yeah, fine. Okay, that makes sense. So the second part then, it says temporary development may be granted time limited plan permission provided it is demonstrated, and then it's deleting the coastal change vulnerability assessment and geotechnical appraisal.
Both of those requirements apply to all development, so they've dropped to the bottom of the policy under the sentence all proposed development.
Okay.
CCNAs. Yes.
Yeah, fine. Okay, that makes sense.
And then,
so
you've got
our points. Sorry.
You've got our householder insertion there.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4 main, and then you've got additional text here for householder. So just talk me through that then. Okay,
so household applications, and they're likely to be our most common application.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it will apply to extensions, outbuildings, and alterations of existing dwellings and CCMAs may be permitted as long as they meet these requirements. So there's 2 requirements attached to that section. Will be safe, and not increase the risk to life during the planned lifetime of the development, and will not exacerbate the rates of coastal change anywhere on the coastline. And then also, you've got the end point, all proposed development. So they'll have to do a vulnerability assessment and do technical appraisal that's proportional to the scale of the development. And that would be, you know, it would be a professional that would need to assess, you know, what was proportional. Yeah. So it might be sufficient to do a letter that from a professional consultant on that matter.
Okay, that's fine. So those changes are necessary for effectiveness. Just in that bit about householder, it refers to a criterion F.
Yes.
I think that is referring to the final requirement for the vulnerability assessment and geotechnical appraisals. We just need to tidy up the bullets and things. Yeah. So
yeah, no, that makes sense now. And then off the back of those changes, you have got further changes to supporting text, which would be consequential changes. There is one addition, which is this reference to permeable surfacing may be permitted for isolated areas of hard standing. However, this will only be the case where the runoff from other hard standing does not drain to this permeable surfacing. Just talk me through that then.
Well, essentially, in the when you're discussing cliff instability, it's the water soaking into the ground in that potentially unstable area. It's not going to improve the stability of the coastal change management area. So for permeable surfacing, we might be able to assess that it was acceptable for a small area, but if larger areas of surfacing were draining into that area, you might increase the amount of soaking into the ground. So the policy refers to the management of surface water using infiltrations and soakaways, but we could add a bit more about surfacing as well.
Let's just have a look at that then. Yeah, I think that's fine. I'm just trying to look at the management of surface water using infiltration always is unlikely to be supported. Okay, fine. So that's just adding supporting text to the book. I think that's fine. So the changes there would be as set out in the hearing statement, have a look at the criteria, make sure they all fit together. So there'd be two main modifications. One would be the policy text change to CC7, and then the other main modification would be the C supporting text that goes with it.
We've got another one there as well.
Which one's that? Sorry.
No, we think we covered that. Covered it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Ms. Wickley, anything on CC7 then?
Thank you kindly. Yes, looking at the response from and the hearing statement from the planning department and the added layer of care that has been put in there, we welcome that. We were concerned when the Reg 19 consultation was out because we had seen some evidence that it was measurements of sea level rise dating back to 2012 that were shaping NPPF as regards coping with sea level rise. And of course, the science has changed quite dramatically since 2012 to 2022, when the reports are coming out about the melting of ice caps going to be causing, we should expect considerably more sea level rise. That's the context. So I think one of the things that we would like to see there, that obviously the cliffs are vulnerable, and we welcome what you've done to protect those areas, but all along our Dover District coast, we've got homes, roads and other services close to the pebble beaches, which are also at risk of the sea level. So we feel the plan would become more sound if any applicant planning a development of over 20 dwellings within 750 metres of the high water shoreline and an altitude of under 12 metres should expect to contribute to the cost of replacing the groins or recharging the beaches with shingle. This is something that we have suggested. We did put in a mention, but I could well imagine this is beyond the scope of a local plan. One of the things that protects us here is our Goodwin Sands. And as I am not a Prime Minister suggesting building an airport on the Goodwin Sands, therefore I am presuming, yes, that was a reference to Mr. Johnson, I am therefore presuming that, protecting the Goodwin Sands from any dredging in order to protect a natural flood, a natural defence, is something that would be well beyond the local plan.
Any comments from the council on those points?
In our IDP, there is references to coastal protection measures that do happen from other organisations and also from projects that are administered from the council in terms of beach enrichment in the district. I haven't got the names of the particular projects right now. And Goodwin Sands presumably is outside the, that'll be in the marine management organisations, but we are required to consult with the marine management organisation whenever there's any development that might affect that area.
And the issue of perhaps protecting the getting to people applying to develop within close to the shoreline and low and under 12 meters, might contributions from them in order to contribute to the costs of recharging beaches, which obviously is a cost to the public, to DDC. One is very aware of how often the recharging of our shingle beaches has to happen to protect homes and roads.
Again, any comments? Just that final point.
I think it would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. If there was a development that came forward that required flood mitigation and it was justified to ask them to contribute, then that there are means within the plan to be able to do that. But it couldn't be a blanket requirement on all development within a particular location, as you suggested. It would need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, depending on what that development specifically required in terms of mitigation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. They were only questions that I had. Anything else that you want to raise, Ms. Wakeleaf, on this sort of wider context and wider issue, or Mr. Bowen, anything from yourself on either what we've heard today in terms of some of the policies that the council needs to have a look at, or in terms of any of the other issues? No.
Climate change CC8.
Yes, this is the trees policy, isn't it?
It is, and it's quite important because there was a superb report that came out from KCC in March 2021, Natural Solutions to Climate Change in Kent, and this was about protecting, and Dover District has more than its fair share of woodlands and wetlands and grasslands, all of which are fantastic means of carbon sequestration and which need protecting, and they also are amenity value for residents now and in the future, and therefore we are strongly of a mind that we need an addition, open quotes, existing trees which are capturing carbon in this decade 2020 to 2030 and in the next decade through to 2040 must be protected. DDC will accelerate the rate of making tree preservation orders and woodland preservation orders and provide appropriate staffing and resources to sustainably and effectively deliver this policy, because honest independent evidence from arboriculturalists is required in order to protect existing trees, because if we're merely vague about facilitating tree planting where possible, then this invites promises that will not be delivered in the experience of many of us living in the area.
Okay, so this is a point that we touched upon this morning, I think, as well, didn't we, in the context of CC8, and that sort of is a twofold policy, isn't it, in terms of the provision of new tree planting and also protection of existing trees. Anything from the council you want to come back on?
Not only that, I think this policy is already quite a strongly worded policy in terms of what it requires in relation to new tree planting, and in terms of the loss and protection of existing trees, the council considers it's going as far as it probably can and is justified to do so.
That's fine. We tree huggers will just have to keep an eye on all planning applications and get our thermoses ready when we need to sit on the entrance of woodland sites. Simple as.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from anybody? No. Any matters arising from the council then before we finish for the day?
No, nothing from us. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. So we'll adjourn for the day. Resume back tomorrow, which is the final sitting day, and it's another 10 o'clock start, I do believe. I know that we'll deal with the Holsbury Homes issue first, because obviously they're coming back to the session. We ran out of time and they wanted to talk about the SANG issue. So we'll talk about that first and then we'll go through the rest of the MIQs. But we've got all day for that session, so we've got more than enough time to deal with that. So yeah, thank you all for your time today, and we'll see you back tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.